have taught military history for 17 cycles, but I never imagined one student would prove that humans never stopped preparing for war. I have been teaching at the Galactic Military History Academy for approximately 17 standard cycles now, and I thought I had seen everything. Everything, every possible student reaction, every cultural misunderstanding, every awkward moment when someone realizes their species' glorious warrior past was actually just them hitting each other with sticks while wearing decorative feathers. But humans, oh, humans are something else entirely. My name is Vorketh, and I am a Galaxian, which means I have 4 eyes, excellent documentation skills, and absolutely zero combat instincts whatsoever. Perfect qualifications for being a teaching assistant in a military history course, right? My professor, a distinguished Threxian named Quelcor, has the same peaceful disposition. We Galaxians keep records. Threxians preserve artifacts. Neither of us has ever thrown a punch, fired a weapon, or done anything more violent than aggressively stamp a document. This is why we teach history instead of making it. The course, officially designated as Comparative Analysis of Pre-Space Warfare Traditions, attracts students from across the galaxy. We get the diplomatic corps candidates, the cultural studies majors, the occasional eccentric who genuinely enjoys learning about ancient conflict without ever wanting to experience it, nice, safe, academic types. Then the humans started joining. It was a typical third day of term morning, which meant Professor Quelcor was running late because he had been organizing his collection of ceremonial helmet replicas. Again, the lecture hall held about 40 students, representing 12 different species, all settling into their seats with varying degrees of enthusiasm. The Yanari twins were already comparing notes on their matching datapad. Broxon, a hulking Targosian with surprisingly gentle manners, was carefully arranging his styluses in order of size. Typical academic behavior. Comforting. Predictable. The human sat 3 rows back off to the left side. Her name was Riley Chen, and she looked utterly, completely, almost suspiciously normal. Average height for a human. Dark hair pulled back in a practical tie, wearing the standard academy uniform without any modifications or flair. She had enrolled 2 weeks prior, submitted all her paperwork correctly, passed the entrance evaluations with solid but unremarkable scores. Nothing about her screamed danger, or warning, or this person is about to turn your comfortable academic world completely upside down. She was taking notes, with an actual physical writing implement, on paper. I found this charmingly retro. Professor Quelcor finally arrived, his 3 arm stalks juggling a projection remote, a data tablet, and what appeared to be a half-eaten nutrition bar. Apologies. The archival wing was reorganizing their storage system, and I simply had to supervise. You cannot trust automated systems with irreplaceable historical recreations. The class settled. Quelcor activated the holo display, and a shimmering image appeared, showing various pieces of ancient armor from across the galaxy. Ornate Yanari ceremonial chest plates with their distinctive flowing designs. Targosian gladiatorial helmets, more decorative than protective. Galaxian, well, we didn't really have armor, but we had very impressive archival boxes, and those were displayed too. Now then, Quelcor's voice carried that particular enthusiasm that only truly passionate academics can manage. For your midterm practical assignment, you will each be recreating a piece of ancient armor from your species' pre-spaceflight era. This is not merely about crafting skills, you understand. This is about connecting with your ancestors, understanding the materials they had available, appreciating the artistry and cultural significance of protective garments from your evolutionary past. Excited murmurs rippled through the classroom. The Yanari twins immediately started sketching designs. Broxon pulled up reference images of Targosian gladiator gear. Everyone seemed energized by the prospect. You will have 4 weeks, Quelcor continued, manipulating the holo display to show a grading rubric. I expect detailed documentation of your research process, material sourcing, construction techniques, and a presentation explaining the cultural context. Remember, this is a history course, not an engineering class. I am far more interested in your understanding of historical significance than I am in perfect technical recreation. Hand shot up with questions. Can we use modern adhesives? Yes, with documentation. Does it need to be wearable? Preferably, but not required. Can we work in pairs? Absolutely not. This is individual work. I watched Riley during all of this. She was not raising her hand. She was not sketching designs or pulling up reference materials. She was simply sitting there, one finger tapping slowly against her chin, with the faintest suggestion of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Not the smile of someone excited about an assignment, not the smile of someone dreading the work ahead, the smile of someone who already knows the punchline to a joke nobody else has heard yet. Are there any questions about the assignment parameters? Quelcor asked, scanning the room with his primary eye stalks. Riley's hand went up, slowly, casually, like she was asking about something completely ordinary. Yes, Miss Chen, just one clarification, Professor. Her voice was perfectly polite, perfectly measured. When you say recreate ancient armor from our pre-space flight era, do you want it cleaned, or would you prefer it with the original bloodstains intact? The classroom went silent, not the comfortable silence of students absorbing information. The sharp, sudden silence of everyone simultaneously thinking, wait, what did she just say? Quelcor's eye stalks blinked in careful sequence, which is Threxian for I am processing unexpected information and require a moment. Excuse me, the armor, Riley repeated, still with that same calm, almost pleasant tone. I can bring in pieces that have been cleaned and restored. Or if you prefer historical authenticity, I have several items still bearing their original combat residue. I just want to make sure I meet your expectations for the assignment. My 4 eyes focused on her with sudden intensity. Original combat residue. She said that like it was a normal thing. Like having blood-stained ancient armor just available was equivalent to owning a historical book or a decorative plate. Miss Chen, Quelcor said slowly, his teaching voice now carrying a thread of uncertainty. This is a recreation assignment. You will be crafting a replica, using historical research and period-appropriate techniques. You are not expected to have actual ancient armor simply available. Riley nodded, making a note on her paper. Actual paper, with actual ink. Right, I understand. So you want me to make a copy? I can do that. I just wanted to check first, because bringing in the real thing would be easier. And I assumed accuracy was important for a history course. My mistake. The real thing. She said the real thing, like it was just sitting in her quarters. Like ancient human armor was something you just had, casually, available for class presentations. Broxon, bless his straightforward Targosian nature, asked the question everyone was thinking. Wait, are you saying you actually own authentic pre-spaceflight human armor, like actual historical artifacts? Riley turned to look at him and her smile widened just slightly. Oh, I wouldn't call them artifacts. Exactly. That makes them sound like museum pieces. They are still functional. Still functional. Those 2 words hung in the air like a confession at a poetry reading, completely changing the atmosphere of everything around them. Professor Quelcor's nutrition bar slipped from his gripstock and hit the floor with a sad little plop that nobody acknowledged. Professor Quelcor recovered his composure with admirable speed, which is what 17 cycles of teaching experience will do for you. He cleared his vocal chamber, retrieved his fallen nutrition bar, and promptly pretended the entire exchange had been perfectly normal. Yes, well, we can discuss specific approaches to the assignment during office hours. For now, let us examine some examples of what I am looking for. The holo display shifted, showing a gorgeous recreation of Yannari ceremonial armor, all flowing curves and iridescent plating. This piece, created by a student 6 cycles ago, demonstrates excellent research into traditional crafting methods. Notice the decorative etchings, the symbolic color patterns, the way each plate represents a different philosophical concept from Yannari culture. Beautiful, Silnith, one of the Yannari twins, breathed. The Third Age design philosophy correct, when armor became purely symbolic rather than protective. Precisely. Quelcor's enthusiasm returned, because Yannari civilization had largely moved past physical conflict by that era. Your warriors became philosophers, mediators, artists. The armor reflected this cultural evolution. I watched this exchange while keeping 2 of my eyes on Riley. She was writing something, still taking notes. Still looking completely disturbingly calm. Broxon raised one massive hand. Professor, my people's gladiatorial traditions were never actually about war, you understand. They were sporting events, tests of strength and skill. Our arena armor was designed for show as much as safety. Lots of dramatic elements, very impressive to spectators. An excellent point, Quelcor agreed. Targosian combat culture was highly ritualized, controlled. The armor reflected social status and athletic prowess more than battlefield necessity. See, this was exactly what the course was supposed to be about. Nice, civilized discussions of how ancient cultures moved beyond violence, how primitive protective gear evolved into ceremonial dress, artistic expression, cultural symbol. Every species in the galactic community had the same basic story. We used to fight, We grew up, we stopped. We kept a pretty armor for festivals and museums, standard galactic development pattern. War, peace, prosperity, space travel, joining the community, simple, universal, comfort. Kessex, a Vorlian with particularly elaborate head fins, contributed next. My ancestors wore crystal-woven mesh, Professor. It was technically functional, but the primary purpose was displaying family lineage through the color refractions. Combat was so rare in our history that armor was really just formal wear for ceremonial occasions. Wonderful example, Clocor said, pulling up images of Vorlian crystal mesh. This supports our central thesis in this course, that most species' military traditions are cultural artifacts from brief periods of conflict, now preserved as historical curiosities. I noticed Silnith glancing back at Riley. What about humans, though? I mean, I have read the initial survey data from Earth. Your species only achieved spaceflight about 80 standard years ago, correct? Your armor traditions must be quite recent, relatively speaking. Riley looked up from her notes. Recent is one way to describe it, sure. I have studied human history. Kessex offered, his fins rippling with scholarly confidence. Fascinating progression, really. Primitive tribal conflicts, then larger organized warfare, then gradual reduction in violence as technology advanced. By the time you reached your information age, actual armor had become obsolete, replaced by ceremonial military dress uniforms, very similar to Vorlian development, just compressed into a shorter time frame. That assessment is not entirely inaccurate, Riley said carefully. Too carefully. The way someone agrees with a statement that is technically correct but fundamentally misses the point entirely. Broxon, who I was beginning to suspect had zero capacity for subtext, pressed forward. So when you mentioned blood-stained armor earlier, you were joking? Yes. Humans have that dry humor, I have learned. Very confusing sometimes but entertaining. Riley tapped her writing implement against her paper, a steady rhythm that somehow sounded ominous. Sure, let us go with that. Professor Qualcor, clearly eager to move past the uncomfortable moment, pulled up more examples. Now, what I want each of you to consider is the why behind your species' armor designs. Not just the how of construction, but the cultural reasoning. What values did your ancestors express through their protective gear? The Yanari twins started discussing harmony and balance. Broxon mentioned strength and honor. Kessex talked about family legacy and social connections. All very civilized. All very nice. All very much about cultures that had put violence behind them thousands of years ago. Riley just kept taking notes, that small smile never quite leaving her face. I pulled up Earth's file on my data tablet, skimming through the preliminary cultural surveys. The reports described a species that had emerged from a lengthy period of global conflict, achieved spaceflight during what they called the late modern era, and were currently in their early stages of post-scarcity development. Standard pattern, maybe a bit more recent violence than most species, but nothing particularly alarming. The survey mentioned museums full of ancient weapons, historical reenactment societies, ceremonial military units that maintain traditional dress. All normal things, all the same stuff every other species had. But something nagged at me. The way Riley had said still functional with such casual certainty, the way she had asked about bloodstains like it was a reasonable question. The complete lack of surprise or confusion when discussing armor as if it were something other than a historical curiosity. Miss Chen, I found myself asking, unable to resist. Your species does preserve ancient armor in museums and private collections, correct? Like other civilized societies? She looked directly at me with both her forward-facing eyes, a human expression I had learned meant full attention. Oh, absolutely. We have extensive museum collections. Very well preserved, carefully catalogued, excellent historical resources. But, I prompted, because there was definitely a but hanging in the air. Her smile grew just a fraction wider. But those are not the pieces I was talking about. Professor Qualcor, wisely or perhaps desperately, chose that exact moment to assign reading materials and dismiss the class early. Nobody moved particularly quickly toward the exit. Everyone was too busy glancing at the human, wondering what exactly she had meant. I had a feeling we were going to find out in 4 weeks. I had a much stronger feeling that we were not going to enjoy the answer. Office hours the following afternoon were supposed to be quiet. Professor Qualcor typically spent them organizing his replica collection. I caught up on grading, and students occasionally wandered in with minor questions about citation formats or source materials. Peaceful, academic, utterly predictable. Riley Chen arrived precisely at the start of office hours. carrying a data tablet and wearing an expression of polite academic inquiry that somehow made me deeply uncomfortable. Professor Quokor Vorketh, thank you for making time, she said, settling into the chair across from Quokor's desk. I wanted to clarify the parameters for the armor assignment before I start gathering materials. Of course. Quokor said, his eye stalks adjusting to focus on her. I appreciate students who seek clarity. What specific aspects need explanation? Riley pulled up something on her tablet, then seemed to reconsider and set it aside. Right, so yesterday I asked about cleaned versus bloodstained presentation. You indicated you wanted a recreation rather than original pieces. I just want to make absolutely certain I understand why. Quokor blinked in that slow, patient way academics use when they think they are dealing with a fundamental misunderstanding. Miss Chen, the assignment is about demonstrating your understanding of historical construction techniques and cultural context. Original artifacts, if your family happens to possess any, would be museum-quality items far too valuable and fragile for classroom presentation. We want you to engage with the crafting process itself. Okay, but here is my confusion, Riley said, leaning forward slightly. The armor I have access to is not fragile. It is not decorative. These are working pieces, maintained across generations, still completely functional for their intended purpose. Using them would demonstrate authentic historical accuracy better than any recreation I could craft in 4 weeks. I felt my primary and secondary eyes narrow in synchronization. Miss Chen, when you say maintained across generations, what exactly do you mean? Are we discussing family heirlooms that have been carefully preserved in climate-controlled storage? No, I mean maintained, she repeated, emphasis on that particular word. As in kept in working condition, repaired when damaged, cleaned when necessary, stored properly so they remain usable. My family has pieces dating back 600 years, some even older if you count the components that have been integrated into newer configurations. 600 years. 600 years. Quokor's nutrition bar, which he had been holding, dropped again. He really needed to work on his grip strength during moments of shock. I am sorry, I said, all 4 of my eyes now locked onto her. Did you just claim your family has been maintaining combat armor in functional condition for 6 centuries? As in, armor that could still be worn and used? Well, yes, Riley said, as if this was the most reasonable thing in the galaxy. That is kind of the point of maintenance, isn't it? What would be the purpose of keeping armor if it stopped being armor and became just a weird metal sculpture? Professor Quokor made a sound that I can only describe as an intellectual whimper. Miss Chen, most species transition away from functional armor within a few centuries of developing advanced metallurgy. By the time they reach spaceflight, combat armor is purely ceremonial, maintained for cultural reasons but never intended for actual use. You are describing equipment that has remained battle-ready for longer than most civilizations maintain standing militaries. Battle-ready is actually a good term for it, Riley agreed. Some pieces show considerable wear, obviously. Combat damage, repair work, modifications for different users over the years. But yes, you could absolutely still fight in them today if you needed to. That is why I asked about the bloodstains. Some of the older pieces have staining that is essentially part of the material now, chemically bonded into the metal and leather, adds character. Honestly, but I wasn't sure if that met your standards for classroom presentation. The room went very, very quiet, not peaceful quiet. The quiet of 2 academics simultaneously realizing that everything they thought they understood about human military history might be catastrophically incomplete. When you say combat damage, Quokor ventured carefully, you are referring to historical damage, correct? From conflicts that ended centuries ago. Riley's expression shifted into something that might have been amusement or might have been pity. Professor, the most recent damage to my family's collection is from my grandfather's service. He retired 12 years ago. The armor performed exactly as designed. 12 years ago. 12 years was not history. 12 years was last week in academic terms. 12 years was basically yesterday. Your grandfather wore ancient armor into combat 12 years ago, I said flatly, needing to hear the words out loud to confirm I had not experienced some kind of sensory malfunction. Ancient is such a weird word for it, Riley mused. I mean, yes, technically old by calendar years, but if something still works perfectly for its intended function, is it really ancient? That is like calling a hammer ancient just because it was forged 300 years ago. If it still hammers nails, it is just a hammer. Hammers do not typically get used in combat, Quokor said weakly. Riley's smile turned slightly predatory. You have clearly never met my grandfather. I pulled up Earth's file again on my data tablet, scrolling frantically through the cultural survey data. There had to be something we missed, some indication that humans were still actively using pre-spaceflight military equipment in actual conflict situations, some warning label that said caution. This species treats war as an ongoing practical concern rather than a historical curiosity. Nothing. Just the standard notes about museums and ceremonial units and historical preservation societies. So, Riley said brightly, given all that context, would you prefer I bring the real armor and explain its actual history of use? Or should I craft a replica and pretend humans stopped needing functional protective gear at some point in our conveniently distant past? Qualcor and I exchanged a look. A very long look. The kind of look two academics share when they realize their nice safe theoretical course has just become terrifyingly practical. Perhaps, Qualcor said slowly, you should bring both. Riley's smile suggested she had been hoping he would say exactly that. 4 weeks passed with agonizing slowness during which Riley Chen attended every class, participated in discussions with perfect politeness, and volunteered absolutely zero additional information about her family's apparently inexhaustible supply of functional combat equipment. Meanwhile, I had stress-researched human military history until my eyes ached, finding exactly nothing that explained why someone would casually maintain battle-ready armor across 6 centuries. Presentation day arrived with typical academic ceremony. Professor Qualcor had arranged the lecture hall with display pedestals, proper lighting and recording equipment for documentation purposes. Students filtered in carrying various containers, boxes and carefully wrapped bundles. The air hummed with nervous excitement, the way it always does when students are about to show off weeks of hard work. Riley entered last, pushing a large unmarked storage crate on a hover cart. She parked it against the back wall without fanfare, then took her usual seat, looking utterly relaxed. That crate worried me. It worried me a lot. Excellent! Excellent, everyone is here, Qualcor announced, his eye stalk sweeping the room with genuine enthusiasm. I am tremendously excited to see what you have all created. Remember, this is not a competition. Each presentation will be evaluated on research quality, construction technique and cultural understanding. Now who would like to go first? Silnith, one of the Yanari twins, eagerly volunteered. She approached the front with a rectangular case that she opened with reverent care, revealing a breathtaking recreation of third-age Yanari philosophical armor. The chest plate caught the light like captured water, its surface covered in flowing script that represented different schools of ethical thought. Each shoulder piece displayed a different geometric pattern symbolizing logical frameworks. This armor, Silnith explained, her voice carrying that particular pride of someone who has truly mastered their subject, was never intended to stop weapons. By the Third Age, Yanari society had transitioned completely to diplomatic conflict resolution. This armor was worn during the Great Debates, philosophical contests where scholars would argue fundamental questions of existence and ethics. The patterns you see represent the wearer's argumentative framework, their logical foundations made visible. She lifted the chest plate, demonstrating its lightweight construction. I used traditional resin bonding techniques, layering the plates exactly as our ancestors did. The entire piece weighs less than 2 kilograms because physical protection was completely unnecessary. This was armor for the mind, not the body. Professor Qualcor practically glowed with approval. Magnificent work, Silnith. This perfectly demonstrates the evolution from martial culture to intellectual tradition. Your research documentation was exemplary. Well done. Broxon went next, hauling forward a considerably heavier piece. His recreation of Targosian gladiatorial armor was all dramatic flair, a helmet with enormous curved horns, shoulder guards that extended outward in sweeping arcs, chest plating etched with his family's traditional athletic symbols. Targosian arena combat, Broxon rumbled, his deep voice filling the hall, was theater as much as sport. This helmet, see these horns. Completely impractical for real fighting, far too easy for an opponent to grab, but in the arena they made the wearer look powerful, intimidating, larger than life. The judges scored partly on athletic skill, partly on showmanship. He demonstrated how the armor pieces connected with ceremonial clasps rather than practical fasteners. I could wear this, technically, but it would be uncomfortable for extended periods and genuinely useless in actual combat, which is exactly authentic to the original purpose. My ancestors were performers, not soldiers. More approving comments from Qualcor. More documentation of how civilized species grew beyond actual violence. Kessex presented his Vorlian crystal mesh recreation. a delicate network of glowing refracting strands that created rainbow patterns across his torso. This piece required 40 hours of individual crystal threading. He explained with obvious pride. Each strand represents a family connection, a lineage link. Vorlian armor was essentially a wearable genealogy chart. Combat protection was almost accidental, a side effect of the crystal density rather than the primary design intent. The presentations continued. Each student brought forward beautiful, ornate, completely non-functional recreations of armor that had stopped being actual protective equipment hundreds or thousands of years ago. Decorative pieces, cultural artifacts, historical curiosities that emphasized art over practicality, symbolism over survival, beauty over brutality. Every single presentation reinforced the same comforting narrative. Intelligent species outgrow violence. Their martial traditions become ceremonial performances. Their protective equipment transforms into wearable art. War becomes memory. Armor becomes costume. Weapons become museum displays. Standard galactic development. Predictable. Safe. Civilized. Professor Quelcor beamed at each presentation, praising research methods, construction techniques, cultural analysis. He was in his element, surrounded by students who had created exactly what he expected, demonstrating exactly the thesis his entire course was built around. I kept two eyes on the presentations, properly appreciative of the genuine effort and scholarship on display. My other two eyes never left that unmarked crate at the back of the room. Riley sat quietly through every presentation, taking notes, nodding at particularly interesting details, occasionally smiling at clever construction solutions. She asked Silith a thoughtful question about resin bonding chemistry. She complimented Broxon on his etching work. She seemed genuinely interested in Kessix's crystal threading technique. She looked like just another engaged student, appreciating her classmates' work, except for that crate. That silent, ominous crate that had not made a single sound since she brought it in. Wonderful. Truly wonderful, Quelcor exclaimed after the last standard presentation concluded. You have all demonstrated exceptional understanding of how military traditions evolve into cultural celebrations of peace. Now then, Miss Chen, I believe you are our final presenter. Riley stood up, stretching slightly. Yes, Professor. Fair warning though, my presentation might run a bit differently than the others. I appreciate creative approaches, Quelcor said encouragingly. Please proceed. Riley walked to the back of the room, placed both hands on her crate, and paused. She looked at the class, at all those beautiful, delicate, purely symbolic pieces of recreated armor, and her smile turned into something that was definitely not academic enthusiasm. So, she said, conversationally, how much do you all actually know about Deathworld evolutionary pressures and their impact on equipment longevity requirements? The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Nobody answered. Nobody wanted to. Riley opened the crate. The first piece Riley lifted from the crate was a breastplate, and the collective intake of breath from 40 students told me everything I needed to know about how wrong our assumptions had been. This was not a recreation. This was not ceremonial. This was not art. This was a scar. The metal, some kind of dark iron alloy, bore the unmistakable signatures of actual use. Deep gouges ran across the chest section, scratches that had torn through protective coating and bit into the underlying material. Dents, dozens of them clustered around the vital organ protection zone. Repairs were visible as slightly different colored metal, welded patches that had been hammered smooth but never polished away. And yes, stains, dark brownish patches that had soaked into the leather straps and oxidized into the metal itself. Riley set it on the display pedestal with a heavy thunk that made several students flinch. This is a cuirass from approximately 1400 Earth years ago, she said, her tone shifting into something between tour guide and equipment specialist. The base construction is 9th century European style, layered iron plates riveted to a leather backing. However, as you can see, it has been modified extensively over the centuries. These side panels were added around year 1200. The shoulder articulation was improved in the 1500s, and this frontal reinforcement plate was welded on by my great-great-grandfather during what humans call the First World War. Quelcor's eye stalks trembled. You are saying this single piece of armor has been in continuous use for 1,400 years. Continuous is maybe overstating it, Riley conceded. There were probably some decades here and there when it sat in storage, but yes, when my family needed torso protection, this was available, functional, and got used. The metal is still structurally sound, the repairs hold, and honestly, against bladed weapons or lower velocity projectiles, It performs exactly as intended. She ran her fingers across one particularly nasty gouge. This one is from a poleaxe strike in 1326. This cluster here, musket balls from 1779. These scoring marks along the side, shrapnel from an explosive device in 1943. Each generation adds their own damage, performs their own repairs, and passes it forward. Broxson raised one massive hand slowly, like he was afraid sudden movement might trigger something. But why? Why would you maintain combat equipment across so many centuries? Why not transition to ceremonial pieces? Preserve the history without the violence. Riley's laugh was short and entirely without humor. Because the violence did not stop, Broxson. That is the part you all keep missing. Humans did not outgrow conflict. We did not evolve past warfare. We just got better at it. And occasionally traditional equipment still has applications. She reached into the crate again, pulling out a helmet this time. This one was in even worse condition, if that was possible. The metal showed burn marks. The face guard had been torn partially away and reattached with crude welding, and one side bore what looked suspiciously like teeth marks, large teeth marks. 15th century basquinet, modified extensively, Riley continued, setting it next to the cuirass. My grandfather wore this during urban pacification operations on a colony world about 18 years ago. The original designers never anticipated plasma weapons, obviously, but the basic principle of deflecting strikes away from the skull translated surprisingly well. The burn damage is from a near-miss energy discharge. The teeth marks are from a Krell mercenary who got creative during close combat. 18 years ago, I heard myself say. All four of my eyes locked on those teeth marks. Your grandfather fought Krell mercenaries 18 years ago while wearing a helmet from Earth's medieval period. Well, he was also wearing modern combat gear, Riley clarified. Tactical vest, energy shielding, the works. But family tradition dictates you bring the old armor when things get personal. And the Krell had burned a civilian shelter. So yes, grandfather decided traditional equipment was appropriate for that particular engagement. She was pulling out more pieces now, laying them across multiple pedestals, gauntlets showing knuckle wear from punching, apparently punching very hard and very often, leg greaves with blast scoring, a chainmail shirt with several links replaced by what looked like modern ballistic fiber, woven directly into the medieval metal rings. This is my personal favorite, Riley said, holding up a vambrace, an armored forearm guard. 16th century Italian design. See the articulation on the elbow joint. Beautiful craftsmanship. But look here, these mounting points on the exterior. My aunt added those in 2309 current calendar. They are hard points for attaching modern tactical equipment. She mounted a plasma cutter on this during a boarding action against pirates. Used a 400-year-old arm guard as the base platform for directed energy weapons. Kessix's head fins had gone completely flat against his skull. A Vorlian stress response. This is insane. You are describing using ancient equipment in modern combat situations. That should not work. The materials are outdated. The designs are primitive. The whole concept is tactically absurd. And yet, Riley said, gesturing at the collection of battered, stained, obviously functional armor spread before us, here we are. Still works. Still gets used. Still comes home with new dents and new stories. Professor Clocor had gone very, very still. Miss Chen, when you say this armor still gets used, do you mean your family specifically, or are you implying this is common practice among human military personnel? Riley paused, considering her answer carefully. My family has particularly old pieces, and we maintain them more carefully than most. But the practice itself, soldiers bringing traditional equipment into modern combat zones for psychological, cultural, or practical reason. Professor, that is not a quirk. That is just Tuesday for humans. She pulled one last item from the crate. A sword. An actual functional edge-sharpened blood-groove-channeled sword. Now, Riley said, hefting the blade with practiced ease, would anyone like to understand why we call Earth a death world, and what that actually means for equipment design philosophy? The silence that followed was not academic contemplation. It was fear. Pure, simple, instinctive fear of a species that had never stopped being dangerous, had never stopped refining violence, had never treated war as something to outgrow, rather than something to perfect. Silnith's beautiful philosophical armor suddenly looked very much like a child's toy, and Riley Chen, standing there in standard academy uniform while holding a blade that had probably ended actual lives, looked very much like something that should not exist in a civilized galaxy. But did. This is a historical lecture hall, not a weapons demonstration facility, Professor Quelcor said, his voice climbing half an octave higher than normal. Miss Chen, while I appreciate your thorough approach to the assignment, I must insist that you put that sword down immediately. Riley looked at the blade in her hand, then back at Quelcor, her expression genuinely confused. Professor, this is an educational presentation about armor functionality. How am I supposed to demonstrate functionality without actually demonstrating it? You could describe it, I suggested, trying to keep my voice calm and academic. Use words, many words, from a safe distance, while not holding sharp objects. But that would be purely theoretical, Riley countered. You have spent 4 weeks teaching us that hands-on understanding beats abstract knowledge. Every other student demonstrated their armor's properties physically. Silnith showed how lightweight her piece was. Broxon proved his helmet's visibility limitations. I am simply following established presentation standards. There was a terrible logic to this argument that made it somehow worse. The difference, Quelcor said carefully, is that their demonstrations involved wearing decorative items, not wielding actual weapons while discussing combat applications. Riley nodded thoughtfully, then set the sword down on the nearest pedestal. Several students visibly relaxed. You make a fair point. Weapons create unnecessary tension in an academic environment. How about this instead? I will put on the armor, demonstrate its range of motion and practical wearability, and simply explain its combat effectiveness verbally. No weapons, no threats, purely educational physical demonstration. This seemed reasonable. Too reasonable, which should have been my first warning sign. That would be acceptable, Quelcor agreed, relief evident in his voice. Riley began strapping on the armor with movements that spoke of long practice. The breastplate went on first, buckles and straps secured with muscle memory precision. The vambraces followed, articulated segments moving smoothly despite their obvious age, gauntlets, greaves, and finally the battered helmet, which she settled into place with a slight adjustment for comfort. The transformation was immediate and deeply unsettling. Moments before, Riley had been a student in academy uniform, slightly odd perhaps, but fundamentally normal. Now, standing in that collection of scarred metal and stained leather, she looked like something that had walked out of humanity's violent past and refused to acknowledge that the present was supposed to be different. Mobility check, she announced, her voice slightly muffled by the helmet. She dropped into a crouch, rose smoothly, twisted at the waist, raised her arms through full range of motion. Every movement was fluid, practiced, completely unrestricted by the armor's weight or bulk. As you can see, despite the age and apparent crudeness of construction, this equipment does not significantly impair movement. The weight distribution is excellent. The joint articulation allows for full combat mobility. She demonstrated a few more movements. A sudden lunge forward that made the front row of students jerk backward. A spinning turn that sent the chainmail skirt flaring. A series of rapid directional changes that should have been impossible in that much metal but clearly were not. The total weight is approximately 23 kilograms, Riley continued, standing normally again. For human physiology, especially human physiology adapted to Earth's gravity, this is entirely manageable for extended periods. My grandfather wore a similar loadout for 6 hours during the incident I mentioned earlier. This is remarkable, Broxon admitted, leaning forward with genuine interest, overcoming his earlier fear. I would have assumed such primitive armor would be restrictive, clumsy, but you move like it is barely there. Practice, Riley said simply. Lots and lots of practice. My family starts training in armor use young. By age 10, most of us can fight effectively in full kit. Age 10. Silnith's voice cracked slightly. You train children for combat at age 10. We train children for lots of things at various ages, Riley replied. Mathematics, language, art, music, and yes, combat. Earth's educational philosophy is fairly comprehensive. A student I did not recognize, a Pelorian named Draxus, stood up from the middle section. He was tall for his species, with the kind of posture that suggested athletic confidence. With respect, Miss Chen, I think you are overstating this armor's effectiveness. It may allow decent mobility, but in actual combat against a trained opponent, age and design limitations would be obvious. Riley's helmet turned toward him, and I swear I could feel her smile through the metal. You sound skeptical, Draxus. I am simply being realistic, Draxus said, his crest rising slightly in challenge. Pelorian martial traditions emphasize speed and precision. Your armor might stop some attacks, but it would slow you down fatally against a quick opponent. No offense intended, but I suspect you are romanticizing your equipment's capabilities. None taken, Riley said pleasantly. Would you like to test that hypothesis? The room went silent again, but this time the silence had a different quality. Anticipation, The kind of horrible fascination that makes people watch approaching disasters instead of looking away. Professor Quelcor stood up so fast his chair fell backward. Absolutely not. This is an academic institution, not a combat arena. Miss Chen, I forbid this demonstration. I am not suggesting actual combat, Riley said, raising her gauntleted hands in a placating gesture. Just a simple mobility comparison. Draxus attempts to tag me with a marker. I attempt to avoid him while wearing this supposedly restrictive armor. First contact ends the demonstration. Completely safe. Purely educational, directly relevant to understanding armor performance metrics. Draxus's crest was fully extended now. Pride engaged. I accept those terms. No. Quelcor's eye stalks waved frantically. I do not authorize this. This is inappropriate, dangerous, and completely outside the scope of a history course. But it was too late. The challenge had been issued and accepted. Every student in the room was now invested in seeing the outcome. Academic authority, I was learning, has significant limitations when confronted with primate pack dynamics and territorial display behaviors. Riley and Draxus moved to the open space at the front of the lecture hall. Someone handed Draxus a marking stylus. Riley settled into a relaxed stance that nevertheless suggested coiled readiness. On your mark, Professor, Riley said, and I realized with horror that she had just made Quelcor complicit by asking him to start the demonstration he had explicitly forbidden. Quelcor, trapped by academic protocol and student expectation, made a small defeated sound. This is a terrible idea, he muttered. Begin, I suppose. Draxus moved first, fast as promised, lunging forward with the marking stylus aimed at Riley's shoulder, the largest target area. His form was excellent, his speed impressive, his technique clearly the result of proper training. Riley was not there when he arrived. She had shifted, not backward but sideways, a minimal movement that took her just outside his reach. Draxus adjusted, striking again, a quick jab toward her midsection. The stylus hit armor with a sharp tap, but Riley had already rotated her torso, angling the breastplate so the strike glanced off the curved surface without making solid contact. Not a tag, not a point, just metal redirecting force exactly as designed. Draxus, committed now, pressed the attack. 3 quick strikes in rapid succession, each one targeting a different zone. Riley deflected one with her vambrace, avoided another with footwork that should have been impossible in Greaves, and caught the third directly on her breastplate in a position where the armor's curve sent the stylus sliding away harmlessly. Then she moved forward, not attacking, just advancing, one measured step that somehow forced Draxus backward. He recovered quickly, credit to his training, and tried a different approach, circling to attack from an angle. Riley pivoted smoothly, the armor moving with her like a second skin, maintaining optimal defensive facing without apparent effort. Notice the principle, Riley said, not even breathing hard, still lecturing while actively demonstrating. Armor does not make you invincible, it makes your opponent's job significantly harder. Every strike that hits metal instead of flesh is a victory. Every attack you can redirect or absorb is an opportunity denied. Draxus tried 5 more times, each attempt more frustrated than the last. Riley avoided, deflected or absorbed each one with minimal movement and maximum efficiency. Finally, breathing hard, Draxus stepped back. Point made, he admitted. Your armor functions as advertised. Riley removed her helmet, her hair damp with sweat but her expression triumphant. Thank you for the practical demonstration. As you can all see, properly maintained traditional armor remains tactically viable even against trained opponents, especially when the wearer has generational knowledge of its capabilities. She began removing the pieces, setting them back on the pedestals with care. Any questions about construction, maintenance, or combat applications? 40 hands stayed down. 40 students sat in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. Professor Quelcor slowly picked up his fallen chair and sat down heavily. Miss Chen, that was the most educationally inappropriate, methodologically questionable, and simultaneously effective demonstration I have ever witnessed in 17 cycles of teaching. Riley smiled. So did I pass? The lecture hall remained frozen in that peculiar post-demonstration silence, the kind where everyone is thinking furiously but nobody wants to be the first to speak. Riley finished packing her armor back into the crate with the same casual efficiency she had shown throughout, like she had not just fundamentally challenged every assumption the Galactic Military History Academy was built upon. Professor Quelcor eventually found his voice, though it sounded somewhat strangled. Miss Chen, I believe perhaps some additional context might be valuable for your classmates. When you say your family has maintained this equipment across centuries, You are describing a cultural anomaly, correct? An eccentric tradition not representative of broader human society. Riley paused, one hand resting on the closed crate, and the expression that crossed her face was something between amusement and pity. Professor, my family is not unusual. We are maybe more dedicated to preservation than average, and we have older pieces than most, but the practice itself, maintaining functional historical equipment, that is completely normal for human military culture, but that makes no sense. Kessex burst out, his head fins flaring in agitation. Every species outgrows this. You develop advanced technology, warfare becomes more civilized or stops entirely, and the old equipment becomes historical curiosity. That is how civilization works. For you maybe, Riley said quietly. But humans never stopped fighting long enough for our equipment to become irrelevant. We have conflicts recorded going back 10,000 years, and those are just the ones we have records for. Older than that, we have archaeological evidence of organized violence extending back 50,000 years or more. We have been refining combat continuously for longer than most species have had written language. I pulled up Earth's full historical database on my tablet, the complete file that went beyond the basic cultural survey. The data loaded slowly, and as it populated I felt a creeping horror that had nothing to do with physical danger and everything to do with pattern recognition. Look at your timeline, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. There is no gap. There is no period where warfare stopped. Every single century has multiple conflicts listed. Every generation experienced combat. The Napoleonic Wars bled into colonial conflicts, which led to your world wars, which transitioned into regional disputes, which never actually ended before you achieved spaceflight. Riley nodded. We went to space while still fighting each other. We colonized other planets while maintaining active military operations on Earth. We developed faster than light travel while training new soldiers in techniques our ancestors would recognize. The technology advanced. The fundamental nature of human conflict did not. Silnith made a small sound of distress. But why? Once you had abundant resources, once scarcity was eliminated, once you could simply leave and settle new worlds, why continue fighting? Because the fights were never really about resources, Riley said, her tone taking on a lecturer quality that somehow made the words more disturbing. They were about ideas. Territories, identities, grudges, perceived injustices, religious differences, political systems, ethnic tensions, and sometimes just because one group looked at another group and decided they did not like them very much. Solving material scarcity did not solve human conflict. It just meant we fought in space, instead of on one planet. Professor Quilcor's eye stalks had drooped to their lowest possible position, a Threxian expression of existential despair. Your species achieved post-scarcity economics 30 years ago. According to your intake documentation, you joined the galactic community as a peaceful, cooperative civilization. The survey teams reported a culture transitioning away from militaristic traditions. We are peaceful, Riley insisted. We cooperate beautifully with other species. We follow community laws. We engage in productive trade. We contribute to collective scientific advancement. But peaceful does not mean defenseless, Professor. It does not mean we forgot how to fight. It means we choose not to. Most of the time, with most people, the armor stays maintained not because we want to use it, because we might need to. Against whom? Broxin asked, his deep voice uncertain. The galactic community has maintained peace for 3,000 years. Major conflict between member species is virtually impossible. Who exactly are you preparing to fight? Riley's smile turned cold. Anyone who assumes human compliance is the same thing as human weakness. Anyone who mistakes our core kriish for inability. Anyone who thinks because we smile and follow rules and participate nicely in galactic civilization, we have somehow forgotten 10,000 years of practiced violence. The room temperature seemed to drop another few degrees. You are describing a species that maintains permanent military readiness disguised as cultural tradition, I said, the pieces clicking together in my mind with horrible clarity. Your museums are not just repositories of history. They are armor. Your historical reenactment societies are not performances. They are training exercises. Your ceremonial military units are not symbolic. They are functional reserve forces maintaining institutional knowledge. Well, when you say it like that it sounds ominous, Riley protested. We prefer to think of it as being prepared. For what? Quilcor demanded. What threat could possibly justify maintaining combat capabilities across thousands of years of technological advancement? Riley was quiet for a moment, then shrugged. We have no idea, Professor. That is the point. Humans learned a long time ago that the universe is dangerous, unpredictable, and deeply unfair. Every time we assumed peace was permanent, we were wrong. Every time we thought we could safely disarm, something proved otherwise, so we stopped assuming. We stopped disarming. We just got better at looking friendly while staying sharp. She patted the crate affectionately. This armor is not a museum piece, Professor. It is a reminder, a promise, a warning. Humans remember how to hurt people very, very effectively, and we maintain that knowledge across generations because forgetting felt too much like volunteering to be victims. The next time the galaxy decided to get interesting, the class sat in stunned silence processing this revelation. Every other species had put their violent past behind them, treating war as an unfortunate but concluded chapter of their development. Humans had just calmly explained that their violent past was not past at all, merely paused, waiting patiently, and maintained equipment and trained reflexes for whatever came next. Professor Qualcomm slowly gathered his teaching materials with trembling eye stalks. Miss Chen, you have successfully demonstrated functional armor construction, historical preservation techniques, and cultural context. You receive full marks on the assignment. Class dismissed. Students filed out quickly, casting nervous glances at Riley and her crate. Nobody lingered. Nobody asked follow-up questions. The beautiful ceremonial, purely symbolic armor pieces seemed almost embarrassing now. Children's toys placed next to functional tools. I stayed behind, helping Quellcore organize pedestals with mechanical efficiency while my mind raced. We need to update the cultural survey data on humans, I said finally. The current files are catastrophically incomplete. Update them how? Quellcore asked wearily. What do we even say? Warning. This species has weaponized nostalgia. Caution. Their museums double as strategic reserves. Please note, their idea of historical preservation includes maintaining combat readiness across millennia. Riley wheeled her crate toward the exit, pausing at the doorway. For what it is worth, Professor, this was an excellent course. I learned a lot about how other species process their military history. Very educational. See you next session. She left, cheerful and polite and absolutely terrifying. Qualcomm and I looked at each other, two peaceful academics who had just learned that one of our students represented a species that treated war not as history but as homework. Not as something to outgrow but as something to perfect. 17 cycles, Qualcomm whispered. 17 cycles I have taught this course, explaining how civilized species evolve beyond violence. Every thesis, every framework, every comfortable assumption, just completely destroyed by one human with a box of family heirlooms. I nodded slowly, closing the final data file on my tablet. The truth sat there in undeniable detail. Humans had not evolved beyond violence. They had industrialized it, systematized it, refined it across 10,000 years of continuous practice, and then politely joined galactic civilization while quietly maintaining every lethal lesson they had ever learned. We should probably inform the community council, I said. And tell them what? Exactly? Qualcomm asked. That humans are dangerous? They already know humans come from a death world. That humans maintain weapons? They already cleared human military forces for community defense operations. What specifically changes with this information? Nothing changed. I realized. Nothing except our understanding. Humans had always been this way. We just had not been paying attention. Somewhere in the academy, Riley Chen was probably returning her armor to storage, already thinking about next week's assignment, perfectly pleasant and perfectly deadly in equal measure, and the galaxy kept turning peaceful and cooperative, with absolutely no idea that one of its newest member species was quietly, patiently, perpetually ready for the peace to end. I hoped it never did, but I understood now why humans maintained their armor, just in case.